On November 2, 1984, at 2:15 in the morning, Margie Velma Barfield walked into the death chamber at Central Prison in North Carolina. She was 52 years old, wearing pink pajamas and blue house slippers, and she was about to make history, becoming the first woman executed in the United States in 22 years. But here's what made Velma's case so chilling. She wasn't just any killer. She was a serial poisoner who used arsenic-based rat poison to murder at least 4 people. And these weren't random victims. They were her elderly patients, her own mother, her fiancé, people who trusted her completely. She cared for them, and then she killed them. What you're about to hear contains disturbing details about serial murder and poisoning. This case involves the systematic killing of vulnerable people, elderly patients, and family members by someone they trusted to care for them. We'll be discussing her methods of murder. Before we begin, hit the like button, share this video, and smash that subscribe button to be the first to know when we publish cases just like this one. November 1st, 1984. Velma Barfield's final day on death row began like any other over the past 6 years, with prayer. But this Thursday was different. She knew it would be her last. Just hours earlier, Velma had made a decision that sealed her fate. She told her attorneys to stop fighting. No more appeals to the Supreme Court. No more legal maneuvers. She was ready to die, she said, with as much dignity as the state of North Carolina will allow. Her lawyer, James Little, tried to change her mind, but Velma was resolute. She'd found religion during her time in prison, becoming a devout Christian who spent her days ministering to other inmates. Even evangelist Billy Graham had praised her work. But she believed her time had come. As the evening wore on, about 300 death penalty opponents gathered outside the prison for a candlelight vigil. Inside, 39 other death row inmates waited and listened. At 2 a.m., Velma's long journey would finally end. But to understand how Velma Barfield ended up in that death chamber, we need to go back to where it all began. Over the course of nearly a decade, she would leave a trail of bodies, all poisoned, all people who trusted her completely. Let's walk through each murder, one by one. Thomas Burke, 1969. The house fire that started it all. Velma's deadly pattern may have started earlier than anyone realized. In 1969, she was married to Thomas Burke, and by all accounts, they'd been happy at first. They had 2 children together. But things changed after Velma had a hysterectomy and developed chronic back pain. She became addicted to prescription drugs, and Thomas turned to alcohol. Their arguments grew bitter and frequent. Then, on April 4th, 1969, something happened that would set the tone for the next decade. After Thomas passed out from drinking, Velma took the children and left the house. When they returned, they found the house burned to the ground, and Thomas dead inside. At the time, it looked like a tragic accident. Jennings Barfield, 1971. The second husband who wouldn't last. A year later, Velma married Jennings Barfield, a widower who seemed like a fresh start. But this marriage was short-lived in the most literal sense. Less than a year after their wedding, on March 22, 1971, Jennings died suddenly of what doctors called heart complications. He was relatively young and had seemed healthy. Velma was now a widow twice over, and she was only 38 years old. Years later, after her arrest, investigators would exhume Jennings' body. What they found was chilling, traces of arsenic in his system. But Velma would never confess to killing her second husband, even when faced with the evidence. Lillian Bullard, 1974, poisoning her own mother at Christmas. By 1974, Velma had developed a pattern, though no one recognized it yet. Her mother, Lillian Bullard, became violently ill with intense diarrhea, vomiting, and nausea, but then, strangely, she recovered completely after a few days. It was like nothing had happened. But during a Christmas visit later that year, Lillian fell ill again. Same symptoms, same sudden onset. This time, though, she didn't recover. She was hospitalized and died on December 30th, 1974. The family was devastated. Velma had lost her mother during what should have been a joyful holiday season. What made this particularly cruel was the trust involved. Velma was caring for her aging mother, helping with medications, preparing meals. Lillian had no reason to suspect that her own daughter was slowly poisoning her with arsenic. The symptoms, the violent stomach pain, the vomiting, the diarrhea, were classic signs of arsenic poisoning. But in 1974, no one was looking for that. They just saw a daughter grieving her mother's sudden illness. Montgomery Edwards, 1977. The caretaker becomes the killer. After serving 3 months in prison for writing bad checks, Velma found work as a caretaker for elderly people. In 1976, she began working for Montgomery and Dolly Edwards in Lumberton. Montgomery was getting on in years and needed help with daily activities. Velma seemed perfect for the job, caring, attentive, reliable. But on January 29, 1977, Montgomery fell ill and died. The family was sad but not suspicious. After all, he was elderly, and these things happen. They had no idea that their trusted caregiver had been systematically poisoning the man they'd hired her to protect. Montgomery's death was just the beginning of what would become a killing spree. Dolly Edwards, 1977, killing the widow too. Just over a month after Montgomery's death, his wife Dolly began experiencing the same symptoms her husband had suffered: violent stomach pain, vomiting, diarrhea. The family might have thought it was grief, or perhaps she'd caught whatever illness had taken Montgomery. But on March 1, 1977, Dolly Edwards died. Now both elderly clients were dead, and Velma was out of a job. Later, when investigators finally caught up with her pattern, Velma would confess to Dolly's murder. She admitted to poisoning the grieving widow, though she never explained why she felt the need to kill both husband and wife. The Edwards family had trusted her completely. John Henry Lee, 1977, another elderly victim. Velma quickly found another caretaking job, this time with 76-year-old Ricord Lee, who had broken her leg and needed assistance. But it wasn't Ricord who became Velma's next victim. It was her husband, John Henry Lee. On June 4, 1977, John Henry began experiencing those now familiar symptoms: racking pains in his stomach and chest, along with violent vomiting and diarrhea. He died that same day. Once again, Velma was the trusted caregiver who had been in the house, preparing meals and helping with medications, and once again, she would later confess to the murder, admitting she had poisoned the elderly man while pretending to care for his wife. Stuart Taylor, 1978, the boyfriend who got too suspicious. Stuart Taylor was different from Velma's other victims. He wasn't elderly or infirm. He was her boyfriend, and he was a relative of Dolly Edwards. This relationship gave Velma access to Taylor's finances, and she began forging checks on his account. But Taylor was getting suspicious, and Velma knew it. So she decided to eliminate the problem. Velma mixed arsenic-based rat poison into Taylor's beer and tea, the same method she'd been perfecting for years. As Taylor grew sicker, Velma played the devoted girlfriend, trying to nurse him back to health. She was right there beside him as the poison did its work. Taylor died on February 3, 1978, and this time doctors performed an autopsy. They found arsenic in his system. Finally, after nearly a decade of murders, Velma's method had been discovered. Stuart Taylor's death would be the crime that brought down Velma Barfield, though by then she had already killed at least 6 people. Stuart Taylor's death changed everything. Unlike Velma's previous victims, Taylor was relatively young and healthy, which made doctors more suspicious when he died so suddenly. The autopsy revealed what no one had been looking for in the earlier deaths: arsenic poisoning. Once investigators had that crucial piece of evidence, they started connecting the dots. Here was a woman who had been present at multiple suspicious deaths over the past decade. They began the grim process of exhuming bodies, starting with Jennings Barfield, her second husband. Sure enough, they found arsenic in his remains, too. Velma was arrested and charged with Stuart Taylor's murder. But investigators knew they were dealing with something much bigger. They had a serial killer on their hands, someone who had been using the same method, arsenic-based rat poison, to systematically eliminate people who trusted her. The question now was, how many victims were there really? And would Velma tell them the truth about what she'd done? When confronted with the evidence, Velma Barfield made a series of confessions that were both revealing and strategic. She admitted to killing her mother, Lillian Bullard. She confessed to murdering Dolly Edwards and John Henry Lee, the elderly people she was supposed to be caring for. And of course, she admitted to poisoning Stuart Taylor, her boyfriend. But here's what's interesting. She never confessed to killing her second husband, Jennings Barfield, even though arsenic was found in his exhumed body. She maintained her innocence in that case, despite the physical evidence. The confessions revealed a pattern that went beyond just the murders. Velma had been forging checks, stealing money, and using her position as a caregiver to access her victims' finances. In many cases, the murders seemed to be motivated by money, either to cover up her theft or to gain access to insurance payouts and inheritances. Despite confessing to multiple murders, prosecutors decided to try her for only one, Stuart Taylor's death. They had the strongest evidence in that case, with the autopsy clearly showing arsenic poisoning and witnesses who could testify about Velma's access to Taylor's food and drinks. It was enough to seek the death penalty, and that's exactly what they did. To understand how Velma Barfield became a serial killer, we need to go back to the beginning. She was born Margie Velma Bullard on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, but grew up near Fayetteville, and right from the start, her childhood was anything but normal. Velma's father was physically abusive, and her mother, the same woman Velma would later poison, never intervened to protect her. It was a household filled with violence and fear, the kind of environment that leaves lasting scars on a child. By the time she was a teenager, Velma was desperate to escape. At just 17 years old, she married Thomas Burke in 1949. It was less about love and more about survival, a way out of an abusive home. For a while, it seemed to work. They had 2 children together and appeared to be building a normal life. But then something happened that would change Velma forever. After a hysterectomy, Velma developed chronic back pain. Doctors prescribed powerful painkillers, and she quickly became addicted. This wasn't unusual for the time. Prescription drug addiction was poorly understood, and doctors often overprescribed these medications. But for Velma, it marked the beginning of a downward spiral. The drugs changed her personality. She became irritable, unpredictable. Her marriage to Thomas deteriorated as he turned to alcohol, and she became increasingly dependent on pills. After Thomas died in that house fire in 1969, Velma's life became a pattern of short-term relationships and financial struggles. She worked various jobs, often as a caregiver for elderly people. It was work she seemed naturally suited for. She was patient, attentive, and trustworthy. Families felt comfortable leaving their most vulnerable members in her care. But Velma was also struggling financially. She had children to support, medical bills to pay, and a drug habit to maintain. This led to her first serious brush with the law. In 1975, she was convicted of writing bad checks, 7 counts in total. She was sentenced to 6 months in prison but served only 3. It should have been a wake-up call, but instead, it was just another step in her descent. By the mid-1970s, Velma had established a pattern. She would take caretaking jobs with elderly people, gain their trust, and then find ways to access their money. When that wasn't enough, or when she feared getting caught, she would eliminate the problem permanently. The prescription drug addiction that started with legitimate medical treatment had evolved into something much darker, a willingness to kill anyone who stood between her and what she needed to survive. When Velma Barfield went on trial in 1978 for Stuart Taylor's murder, her defense team faced an uphill battle. The evidence was overwhelming. Arsenic in the victim's body, Velma's access to his food and drinks, and her own confession. So they tried a different approach, the insanity defense. Her lawyers brought in Dr. Dorothy Ottnow Lewis, a respected psychiatrist from New York University and an expert on violent behavior. Dr. Lewis testified that Velma suffered from dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. According to Lewis, Velma had developed an alternate personality named Billy as a result of childhood sexual abuse. The defense claimed that Billy was the one who committed the murders, not Velma. Dr. Lewis even testified that she had spoken directly to this other personality, and that Billy had told her he killed Velma's abusers to protect her. But the prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued that Velma was a cold, calculating killer who used poison to eliminate people for financial gain. They pointed to the forged checks, the pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly people, and the systematic nature of the crimes. The judge wasn't buying the multiple personality defense. When Dr. Lewis finished her testimony, he reportedly said, "One of them did it. I don't care which one." The jury agreed, finding Velma guilty of first-degree murder. The jury didn't just find Velma guilty. They sentenced her to death. She was transferred to Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, becoming the state's only female death row inmate. There was no designated area for women under death sentences at the time, so she was housed in a section for escape-prone and mentally ill prisoners. But something remarkable happened during those 6 years on death row. Velma found religion. She became a devout Christian, spending her days reading the Bible and ministering to other inmates. Her transformation was so complete that even evangelist Billy Graham praised her prison work. This spiritual conversion became the basis for a clemency appeal. Supporters argued that Velma had proven she could live a life of value behind prison walls, helping other prisoners find their way. But as her execution date approached in 1984, Velma made a decision that surprised everyone. She told her attorneys to stop fighting. No more appeals to the Supreme Court. She wanted to die, she said, with dignity. She was ready to meet her maker. At 2 a.m. on November 2, 1984, Velma Barfield was escorted to the death chamber at Central Prison. She was wearing pink pajamas and blue house slippers, a strangely domestic outfit for such a momentous occasion. 16 witnesses were present to watch the first woman executed in America in 22 years. The execution method was lethal injection, making Velma not just the first woman executed since the death penalty resumed, but also the first woman ever to die by this method. She was strapped to a gurney and administered a sleep-inducing drug first, followed by procuronium bromide, a muscle relaxant designed to stop her heart and breathing. Witnesses later said she appeared to die peacefully. "I didn't notice any type of suffering," reported Ramona Jones from the Raleigh Times. "She just seemed to relax." The entire process took about 15 minutes from start to finish. When prison officials offered Velma a specially prepared last meal, she turned it down. Instead, she chose something surprisingly simple: cheese doodles and Coca-Cola. It was the kind of snack a child might pick, not what you'd expect from someone facing execution. Just before the lethal injection began, Velma issued her final statement. "I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who have been supporting me all these 6 years." Earlier that day, she had told a friend something that revealed her mindset. "When I go into that chamber at 2 a.m., it's my gateway to heaven." For Velma, death wasn't punishment. It was redemption. Outside the prison, about 300 death penalty opponents held a candlelight vigil, while roughly 80 supporters of capital punishment cheered as the execution time approached. Inside the prison, the other 39 death row inmates banged rhythmically on their cell windows, a hollow protest that echoed through the damp morning air. At 2:15 a.m., Velma Barfield was pronounced dead. Velma Barfield's execution marked several grim milestones: the first woman executed since 1962, and the first woman ever to die by lethal injection. Her body was rushed to a medical school where doctors harvested her corneas and skin tissue for donation. Her heart couldn't be restarted for transplant. The execution also created political controversy. coming just days before Governor Jim Hunt's Senate race against Jesse Helms. If you found this case as compelling as we did, please give this video a like and share it with others who are interested in true crime history. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest deep dives into America's most notorious criminal cases.